Let's break down the best potential streaming options at the defensive special teams slots for week 3 and go over what defenses you must start. Before we do so, let me remind you that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action the entire season. Their week 3 pick'ems are already going live, and their week 2 pick'ems for Monday Night Football have been live. If you guys want to claim a new customer pick'em for Monday Night Football before the game kicks off, Jalen Hurts over half of a total yard, be sure to use promo code the catch. That link is down below. And if you guys watch this video later in the week, don't worry, you can get a free Aaron Rodgers over half of a total yard for Thursday Night Football pick'em to use with that same promo code. And while you're at it, you're going to get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog. That's up to $1,000 in bonus cash you can use on Underdog with promo code the catch plus that free new customer pick'em. Let's break down what defenses we need to be targeting moving into week 3. All right, first up, let's talk about the Cleveland Browns, who did kind of shoot up in roster percentage after having a low roster percentage moving into week 1. So they're sitting at 79% rostered moving into week 3. But if they are out there or if you own them, they're probably my must-start defense of the week because they will face Daniel Jones. I mean, it's not even really facing the Giants. It's facing Daniel Jones. And in week 2, they had, a total of 11 fantasy points, allowed just 13 total points, 4 sacks, a forced fumble, and 323 total yards of offense. But I mean, in no way are we concerned about this offense in week 3. They are at home, which is always important for me for the most part in these streaming defenses, and they face Daniel Jones, who, I'll hand it to Daniel Jones, didn't turn the football over in week 2, but that was against the worst defense in the entire league in the Washington Commanders. We know that the interception potential is very high when a defense is facing Daniel Jones. So, been a little bit up and down for the Cleveland Browns defense to start the year. 3 points in week 1 and 11 points, like I said, in week 2. But in the next coming weeks, they will face the Giants, the Raiders, and the Commanders. So if you own the Browns, you cannot drop them. If you're in a league where they are floating around and available, you have to add the Cleveland Browns moving into week 3. They are an absolute must-start defense, no questions asked. All right, moving along, let's take a look at the Las Vegas Raiders, who have been a very bad defense through the first 2 weeks of the season. 1 point in week 1, 4 points in week 2. And honestly, if they were facing any other team in week 3, I don't think I'd have any confidence. But they are at home against the Carolina Panthers. And for the time being, unless something changes at quarterback for the Panthers, we are starting whatever defense and streaming whatever defense plays the Panthers. Bryce Young now has 3 interceptions through the first 2 games of the season. He somehow has not fumbled the football, which I guess is an improvement because he had 11 fumbles and 6 lost fumbles last year, but he is also getting sacked at a pretty high rate, 6 sacks through the first 2 games. Nothing crazy, but high enough that we can consider looking at a player like Max Crosby for the Raiders having a lot of potential this week. And once again, the interception potential very high for the Raiders defense this week. So I don't think I need to break this down like super in depth. It's just, the Raiders are playing the Panthers this week. They're not a very good defense, don't get me wrong, but they are in a spot where they are a very viable streaming defense moving into the week, sitting at 7% rostered at the time being. If they are out there and available, which in most leagues they should be, and you need a streaming candidate, the Raiders have to be a top streaming candidate against the Panthers moving into week 3. All right, next up, we've got another good streaming candidate who hasn't really been a good defense thus far on the year, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up against the Broncos at home. The Buccaneers have scored just 4 fantasy points in each game so far this year. They had 2 interceptions in week 2 against the Lions, 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles in week 1, but ultimately this secondary and even the run defense has just been pretty poor. But they have a good opportunity here in week 3 against the Bo Nix-led Broncos to put up a nice fantasy stat line. Bo Nix, through the first 2 games of the season, has 4 interceptions. interceptions and just one total touchdown, which was a rushing touchdown at the end of the game in week 1. So the Broncos remain a team that we are wanting to stream against when we look at the defensive special teams position in fantasy football. So, this is why we call it streaming, because, it's not every single week that we're going to have any confidence in the Raiders or the Buccaneers defense with how they have been performing. But we have to look at the teams they're going up against when we have quarterbacks like Bryce Young and Bo Nix who are consistently turning the football over. We have to try and take advantage of that. It's a good home opportunity for the Buccaneers defense to come out and have a solid day. So as long as we're seeing these quarterbacks that have that interception potential, we have to try and start a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers moving into week 3. Next up, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks, who will face the Miami Dolphins at home in week 3. Seahawks I liked a lot going into week 1 against the Bo Nix Broncos, had 10 fantasy points, and I liked them again in week 2 against the Patriots and Jacoby Brissett at quarterback on the road, and they didn't really show up. I mean, they had a forced fumble, 3 sacks, but they still allowed 20 total points and 310 total yards of offense and just 6 fantasy points in week 2. Now, this is an interesting one that we're going to want to keep an eye on as the week progresses, but they have a unique opportunity here in week 3 because Tua Tagovailoa is more than likely not playing in week 3. Now, technically speaking, there is a chance that Tua plays in week 3, but I'm going to go ahead and give my best educated guess that Tua is not playing in week 3, which means that Skylar Thompson is going to be the starting quarterback for the Dolphins in week 3 in relief of Tua last week. Didn't turn the football over, but he was 8 of 14 for 80 total yards. But also that was just a game script where the Dolphins could maybe do a little bit more because there was no way they were going to end up winning that football game. Now, we go back to 2022. That is the last time we've seen a full start out of Skylar Thompson. Last year, we got none. But in 2022, he had 3.6 fantasy points against the Jets in week 5. He had a fumble and a pick in that game and 166 passing yards. The following week, he didn't turn the football over, and I don't remember if I think he got hurt in that game or they went to a different quarterback, but he had just 4.4 fantasy points the following week. Then we look at the end of the season. He had 7 fantasy points in week 17 at New England. He had a touchdown and a pick in that game. And then we look at week 18 against the Jets. Again, he had 6 fantasy points. So there's a very in-depth 2022 breakdown of Skylar Thompson. But the point being is we see more interceptions than touchdowns, and we see no more than 7.56 fantasy points scored out of Skylar Thompson in any of those games. So the Seahawks have been a defense that has at least been streamable to start the year, even if they disappointed in week 2. And now they're going to have an opportunity to go up against a backup quarterback in Skylar Thompson at home. So I would even argue that the Seattle Seahawks might be a top priority ad going into the week. They do sit at 55% rostered. If they are out there, I really like them as we approach week 3. All right, next up, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are 89% rostered. They'll face the Chargers in week 3. If they are out there, you have to pick them up. They're probably not out there. If you own them, don't get cute. You have to start the Steelers once again, who have double-digit performances in their first 2 games on the season. And you might be looking at the Chargers like, I don't feel as good about this matchup, but don't be afraid of the Chargers. Well, that run game has been great, and Justin Herbert's done some things. There's just no reason to fear this offense on the road. Herbert may have thrown 2 touchdowns in week 2 compared to the 1 in week 1, but he also threw a pick and he had a fumble that was lost. So there's actually nice turnover upside through interceptions potentially or fumbles potentially out of Herbert in this matchup. This front 7 for the Steelers still looks great. They're going to continue to keep games very close, be very stingy on defense. Hardly allowed any points whatsoever in week 2. They had 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 6 tackles for loss after having 2 picks, a forced fumble, 2 sacks, and 3 tackles for loss in week 1. They've allowed just 16 total points to opponents so far on the season. So don't overthink it. Don't be afraid of the Chargers. The Steelers remain a must-start defense moving into week 3. All right, next up, let's take a look at the first team that will be on the road that I want to talk about. That's the Green Bay Packers, who had 7 fantasy points against the Eagles, 2 interceptions and a forced fumble, as well as 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks in week 1. So, I mean, they allowed 34 total points in week 1 and still had a lot of good marks that we look for when we look at streaming defenses. Then in week 2, allowed just 10 points, had a sack, a forced fumble, 3 interceptions, and 4 tackles for loss against Anthony Richardson and the Colts. A lot of people, including myself, going into that game thought we should be streaming against Malik Willis, the Green Bay Packers, and it really turned out you should be streaming against Anthony Richardson and the Colts. But nonetheless, 12 fantasy points in week 2. Then they get another good opportunity here in week 3, going up against the Will Levis-led Tennessee Titans. So Will Levis, 3 interceptions, 2 lost fumbles in the last 2 weeks, no more than 192 total passing yards in either game for Will Levis. So we know that the turnover potential is very high for the Titans this week. We know that Will Levis, in general, the interception potential is very high as a whole. And like I said, he's had a lost fumble in each game as well. So the Packers have to be a streaming option moving into the week. Even though they're on the road, I'm not going to overthink it. This is a good matchup. They're sitting at just 6% rostered, so I really like the Packers right now. If you're in need of a streaming option, they are a fantastic candidate against Will Levis and company as we approach week 3. All right, the last team I will talk about is the Buffalo Bills facing the Jaguars at home this week. And you might be saying, the Bills, I mean, they're not going to be available, but at the time of recording this, they're sitting at 19% rostered, and they finished week 2 with 18 fantasy points against the Dolphins. Really looked good in week 2 on the road. 3 picks, a touchdown, 10 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, and allowed just 10 total points. Like I said, finished with 18 fantasy points. And in week 3 at home, they will face the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I think this is another good opportunity against an offense that just kind of looks like they are in shambles. Trevor Lawrence had a fumble last week and no turnovers in week 1. And I will note the fumble, he didn't end up losing, but he did fumble nonetheless. But ultimately, this Jaguars offense just doesn't look very inspired. I mean, you have Travis Etienne still producing a good floor, but in terms of like the wide receiver room here, I know Brian Thomas Jr. has been doing things, but Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk have been really inconsistent. Evan Ingram wasn't healthy in week 2. Brenton Strange couldn't really come up with a whole lot, although he did have 65 total receiving yards. So I guess that's okay. But if you're watching these Jaguars play right now, you know that something is missing out of this offense, and they're probably going to end up playing from behind in this game. And there should be some turnover potential for the Bills as they face the Jaguars this week. So a strong finish for the Bills defense in week 2. I will not be surprised if that is the case again as we approach week 3. And that'll do it for today's video. There are your must-start defenses and streams. If you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever, moving into week 3 of the season, drop them down below. I will answer every single fantasy football question in the comments down below. And don't forget, as the week progresses, we will have everything that you guys need here on the channel. We already have our week 3 waiver wire ads out for the week, but on top of that, we're going to have start sits at wide receiver, running back, quarterback, and tight ends, every single matchup, every single player. We're going to have buy low trade candidates. We're going to have must start running backs and wide receivers, and we're going to have last minute waiver wire additions as well as a full breakdown Sunday morning in a video format for you guys. On top of that, fantasy Q&A live streams throughout the week. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel to make sure you're not missing out on anything that's going to help you bring home a dub moving into week 3 of the season. And with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.